Hello, and welcome to Bedtime Science. Before we begin tonight's journey, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy calm explorations of science designed to help you relax, unwind, and drift gently towards sleep. It really does help the channel grow and allows more people to discover these quiet scientific stories. And while you're settling in, I'd love to know where you're listening or watching from tonight. Perhaps you're curled up in bed somewhere in Europe, relaxing on a sofa in North America, or listening quietly on headphones on the other side of the world. Wherever you are, it's a comforting thought that people across the planet are sharing this quiet moment together, thinking about creatures that once walked this same earth hundreds of millions of years ago. Because tonight, we're exploring some of the strangest dinosaurs ever discovered. When most people imagine dinosaurs, a few familiar images usually come to mind. Towering predators like Tyrannosaurus rex, massive long-necked giants wandering ancient forests, or perhaps the iconic three horns of Triceratops. But the deeper scientists dig into the fossil record, the more it becomes clear that dinosaurs were far stranger than those classic images suggest. Some had claws longer than swords, some had sails rising from their backs like the fins of prehistoric ships. Others may have glided through ancient forests on wings that looked more like those of bats than birds, and one enormous predator may have spent much of its life swimming through rivers like a crocodile. These animals were not simply oversized reptiles repeating the same body plan again and again. Instead, the dinosaur world was filled with experiments in evolution, unexpected shapes, unusual lifestyles, and anatomical designs that seem almost unbelievable at first glance. Over the past few decades, new fossil discoveries from places like Mongolia, Argentina, China, and the deserts of North Africa have revealed dinosaurs that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations of scientists. Creatures that completely challenge what we thought dinosaurs could be. Tonight, we'll take a slow journey through this hidden side of the prehistoric world. We'll meet dinosaurs with bizarre claws, unusual armor, strange wings, and feeding strategies unlike anything alive today. Along the way, we'll also explore the ideas scientists use to understand how such unusual creatures evolved, because evolution, given enough time, often produces forms far more imaginative than anything we might invent ourselves. So wherever you are in the world tonight, get comfortable, let the lights dim, and let's gently step back through deep time to discover the strangest dinosaurs ever discovered. When most people imagine a dinosaur, a very particular picture tends to appear in the mind. A towering predator with enormous teeth, a gigantic long neck rising above ancient forests, or perhaps a horned giant marching slowly across a prehistoric plain. These images feel familiar because they were the dinosaurs first revealed to the world. For more than a century, museums, books, and films repeated these same iconic forms. Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, Brontosaurus. Creatures that seemed powerful, imposing, and unmistakably reptilian. And for a long time, scientists themselves held a fairly narrow view of what dinosaurs were. To understand how that picture formed, it helps to travel back to the early days of paleontology, when the first fragments of dinosaur bones were beginning to emerge from the ground. In the early 19th century, naturalists across Europe were slowly realizing that the Earth had once been home to animals unlike anything alive today. Fossil bones were being discovered in quarries, cliffs, and road cuttings. Some were enormous, others were strangely shaped. Many were difficult to interpret. At first, these fossils were simply classified as belonging to large reptiles. Then, in the year 1842, a British anatomist named Richard Owen proposed something new. Owen examined several large fossil species that had been discovered in England, including Megalosaurus, Iguanodon, and Hylaeosaurus. Although the fossils were incomplete, Owen noticed that these animals shared certain anatomical traits that distinguished them from other reptiles. Their limbs were positioned more directly beneath the body, rather than sprawling out to the sides. Their vertebrae had unusual structural features, and their overall skeleton suggested creatures that were active and terrestrial, rather than sluggish swamp dwellers. Owen concluded that these animals belonged to a distinct group. He named that group Dinosauria. The word itself comes from Greek roots, dinos meaning terrible or fearfully great, and sauros meaning lizard. In Owen's time, terrible did not mean frightening in the modern sense. It meant awe-inspiring, powerful, and immense. The terrible lizards. The name captured the imagination of Victorian Britain almost immediately. But the early fossil evidence was limited, and many interpretations were influenced by the scientific assumptions of the era. Dinosaurs were generally reconstructed as large, heavy reptiles with thick bodies, slow movements, and limited diversity in shape. Illustrations from the late 19th century often show them looking like oversized crocodiles or lizards walking stiffly across the landscape. For decades, that image dominated scientific thinking. Then, as more fossils were discovered around the world, that simple picture began to fracture. New species appeared with strange crests, unusual armor, elongated necks, tiny heads, massive tails, and limbs arranged in unexpected ways. Some were gigantic, others were surprisingly small, some had long claws, while others had elaborate horns or plates. Gradually it became clear that dinosaurs were not a narrow group of animals repeating the same body plan again and again. They represented something far broader. In modern paleontology, scientists often talk about a concept called evolutionary disparity. The term refers to the range of different body designs within a group of organisms. Two animal groups might contain roughly the same number of species, yet one group could exhibit far more variation in anatomy, lifestyle, and physical structure. That difference in variation is what scientists describe as disparity. Matthew Carano, a paleontologist at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, has studied this concept extensively in dinosaurs. By examining skeletal measurements across large datasets of fossil species, Carano and his colleagues have shown that dinosaurs displayed remarkable levels of anatomical diversity. Their bodies explored an extraordinary range of shapes. Some walked on two legs, balancing their bodies with long muscular tails. Others moved on four pillar-like limbs capable of supporting enormous weight. Some had narrow skulls filled with sharp teeth designed for slicing flesh, while others evolved complex dental batteries suited for grinding tough plant material. Even their skin and external features varied dramatically. Certain species carried thick armor plates embedded in their skin, structures called osteoderms. Others developed long spikes or elaborate horns. Some species evolved thin sails stretching along their backs, and still others, as we now know from exceptionally preserved fossils, were covered in feathers. This remarkable variety reflects something deeper about how evolution works over long periods of time. Dinosaurs existed for more than 160 million years, stretching from the late Triassic period through the end of the Cretaceous. That immense span of time allowed countless generations to experiment with different ecological roles. Some dinosaurs became predators at the top of their ecosystems. Others specialized in feeding on low-growing plants. Some may have lived in forests. Others roamed open floodplains or coastal regions. Each new ecological niche presented a new set of challenges, and evolution responded by shaping new anatomical solutions. In recent decades, scientists have begun studying dinosaur diversity not just by counting species, but by modeling how those species change through time. One paleontologist who has contributed significantly to this work is Steve Brusatte, whose research explores patterns of dinosaur evolution across millions of years. By analysing fossil data across geological layers, Brusatte and his collaborators have shown that dinosaurs did not simply increase steadily in number. Instead, their evolutionary history was punctuated by bursts of innovation. At certain moments in deep time, entirely new body plans appeared. Some lineages suddenly diversified into many new forms, occupying ecological roles that had previously been empty. At other times, environmental changes or extinction events reshaped ecosystems, opening the door for new evolutionary experiments. Michael Benton at the University of Bristol has also conducted extensive work on dinosaur diversification. His research uses statistical models to examine how dinosaur groups expanded and adapted across different geological periods. These studies reveal that dinosaurs were extraordinarily successful at exploring new evolutionary possibilities. When one lineage disappeared or declined, another often evolved to fill the ecological gap. Over time, this process produced creatures that were sometimes familiar and sometimes astonishingly strange. In fact, many of the dinosaurs we now recognize as the most unusual were once considered scientific puzzles, fossils that seemed too strange to fit comfortably into existing categories, bones that hinted at animals unlike anything previously imagined. Some dinosaurs possessed claws so large that scientists initially misidentified them as belonging to giant turtles. Others had skulls shaped like ducks, yet bodies the size of buses. One predator developed a long sail along its spine and a skull shaped like a crocodile. Each discovery forced scientists to expand their understanding of what dinosaurs could be, and each new fossil added another piece to a much larger picture. A picture in which dinosaur evolution was not predictable or uniform, but dynamic and creative. Given enough time, natural selection produced animals that filled nearly every terrestrial role imaginable. Towering giants that could browse the tops of ancient forests, swift runners that chased prey across open plains, armored herbivores capable of defending themselves against formidable predators, small feathered creatures gliding between trees, and forms that remain so unusual that paleontologists still debate exactly how they lived. These creatures were not exceptions to dinosaur evolution. They were part of its natural outcome. Evolution, when given millions of years and countless generations, often produces solutions that appear almost improbable. Structures that seem exaggerated, bodies that look unfamiliar, adaptations that reveal how flexible life can be when responding to changing environments. In the story of dinosaurs, those strange adaptations are not rare curiosities. They are central to understanding how this remarkable group of animals dominated Earth for so long. Because beneath the familiar giants that fill museum halls lies a deeper and far more surprising truth. The dinosaur world was filled with extraordinary diversity, and some of its most fascinating inhabitants were also its strangest. If dinosaurs lived across the Earth for more than 160 million years, an obvious question naturally follows. How do we know what they looked like at all? After all, the animals themselves vanished tens of millions of years ago. Their skin, muscles, organs, and voices have long since disappeared. What remains are fragments of bone, sometimes broken and scattered, occasionally preserved in remarkable detail, but often incomplete. Yet from these fragments, scientists have reconstructed entire ecosystems. The key to this remarkable process lies in a branch of science known as taphonomy. Taphonomy is the study of what happens to an organism after it dies. The word itself comes from Greek roots meaning burial and law. In other words, the rules that govern how living things become fossils. The field became especially influential through the work of paleontologist Anna K. Berensmeyer at the Smithsonian Institution. Beginning in the 1970s, Berensmeyer studied modern animal carcasses in environments such as Kenya's Amboseli National Park. By observing how bones weathered, scattered, and became buried over time, she developed a clearer understanding of the processes that eventually lead to fossilization. Her research revealed something important. Fossils are not simply the remains of animals that died. They are the remains of animals that died under very particular circumstances. Most organisms never become fossils at all. When an animal dies in an open environment, scavengers quickly dismantle the body. Bacteria break down soft tissues. Weather and erosion scatter the bones. Over time, nearly everything disappears. For fossilization to occur, several unlikely events must happen in the correct sequence. First, the remains must be buried relatively quickly. This might happen in a river flood, a volcanic ashfall, or a sediment-rich lake bed. Burial protects the bones from scavengers and slows the processes of decay. Next, mineral-rich groundwater gradually seeps through the sediments surrounding the remains. Over thousands or millions of years, minerals replace the original organic material within the bones. This process transforms fragile skeletal tissue into stone while preserving the original structure. The result is a fossil. In many cases, only the hardest parts of the body survive this transformation. Bones, teeth, and sometimes shells are the most common. Soft tissues like skin, feathers, and internal organs usually vanish long before mineralization can occur. Because of this, the fossil record is naturally incomplete. Paleontologists sometimes compare it to a book in which most of the pages are missing. Yet occasionally nature produces exceptions. There are rare locations where fossil preservation occurs with extraordinary detail. These deposits are known as Lagerstätten, a German word meaning storage places. In these environments, fossils can preserve not only bones but delicate soft tissues that would normally decay almost instantly. One of the most famous examples is the Jehel biota of northeastern China. The Jehel fossil deposits formed during the early Cretaceous period roughly 120 million years ago. At that time, the region contained lakes surrounded by forests and active volcanoes. Periodic volcanic eruptions blanketed the landscape in fine ash, which rapidly buried animals that had died near the lakes. The ash created an unusually stable chemical environment. Fine sediments settled gently over the remains, preserving details so delicate that even feathers and skin patterns survived. Chinese paleontologist Zhou Zhonghe of the Chinese Academy of Sciences has spent decades studying fossils from this region. His work has revealed an astonishing diversity of feathered dinosaurs, early birds, fish, insects, and plants. Some fossils from the Jehol deposits preserve feather structures so clearly that individual strands remain visible under magnification. Others retain traces of pigment cells called melanosomes, allowing scientists to infer the colours these animals may have displayed during life. These discoveries dramatically expanded our understanding of dinosaur anatomy. Before such fossils were found, many scientists assumed that dinosaurs were covered primarily in reptilian scales. The Jehol fossils showed that feathers were far more widespread than previously imagined. In fact, entire groups of small dinosaurs appear to have been feathered. This revelation transformed the scientific picture of prehistoric ecosystems. Suddenly, dinosaurs were not merely scaly reptiles, but animals with plumage, colour patterns, and complex external features. And this is only one example of how exceptional fossil preservation can reshape scientific understanding. In recent decades, new technologies have also revolutionized the study of fossils. One particularly powerful tool is computed tomography, more commonly known as CT scanning. CT scanners use X-rays to create detailed three-dimensional images of objects without physically cutting them open. Hospitals use these machines to examine bones and internal organs in living patients. Paleontologists use them to peer inside fossils. A fossil skull, for example, might contain fragile internal structures that cannot be seen from the outside. By scanning the specimen, scientists can digitally reconstruct cavities within the bone that once housed the brain, inner ear, or blood vessels. This technique has allowed researchers to estimate dinosaur brain size, analyze balance mechanisms in the inner ear, and even reconstruct the shapes of respiratory passages. One famous example involves the study of the dinosaur Nigersaurus, whose delicate skull bones were examined through CT imaging by Paul Sereno and his colleagues. Without scanning technology, preparing the fossil mechanically would likely have destroyed its fragile structure. Instead, the skull could be studied safely through digital reconstruction. Another rapidly developing area is biomechanical modelling. In this approach, scientists build computer simulations of dinosaur skeletons and test how those structures might have functioned in life. Researchers can estimate how muscles attached to bones, how joints moved, and how forces travelled through limbs during walking or running. Biomechanists such as Carl Bates at the University of Liverpool have used these techniques to analyse dinosaur locomotion. By modelling body mass, limb posture, and stride length, they can estimate how fast certain species might have moved or how efficiently they walked. These models often reveal surprising results. Some dinosaurs once imagined as slow and lumbering turn out to have been agile and capable runners. Others appear to have had unusual postures that differed from earlier reconstructions. Yet understanding anatomy alone is not always enough. Scientists also want to know why strange anatomical features evolve in the first place. This question brings us to a field known as evolutionary developmental biology, often abbreviated as EVO-DEVO. EVO-DEVO studies how the genetic processes that control development influence the evolution of body structures. Instead of focusing only on adult anatomy, researchers examine how embryos grow and how genes regulate the formation of limbs, feathers, horns, and other features. Biologist Armin Mocek has conducted influential research on how developmental pathways can produce dramatic variations in animal structures. His studies show that relatively small genetic changes during development can lead to large differences in adult anatomy. In other words, evolution does not always need to invent entirely new genes to create unusual body parts. Sometimes it simply modifies when, where, or how existing developmental programs operate. This insight helps explain how dinosaurs could evolve such a wide range of anatomical designs. Features like elaborate crests, horns, sails, and feathers may arise through changes in developmental timing or gene regulation. When those changes prove useful in survival or reproduction, natural selection can gradually refine them over generations. Taken together, these fields of study reveal something profound. The fossil record is not merely a catalogue of extinct animals, it is a record of evolutionary experimentation. Across millions of years, dinosaur lineages explored an extraordinary range of anatomical possibilities. Some adaptations proved highly successful and persisted for tens of millions of years. Others appeared briefly before disappearing again. Each fossil represents a snapshot within that vast evolutionary laboratory, and as paleontologists continue uncovering new specimens from ancient rocks around the world, one lesson becomes increasingly clear. The prehistoric world was filled with creatures far stranger than earlier generations of scientists ever imagined. Among the many unusual dinosaurs uncovered by paleontologists, few are quite as bewildering as a creature named Therizinosaurus. Even the name carries a sense of mystery. Therizinosaurus means scythe lizard, a reference to the enormous curved claws that first brought the animal to scientific attention. These claws are not merely large by dinosaur standards. Each one can reach well over a meter in length, longer than the forearm of a human adult, and shaped like the blade of an enormous gardening tool. If you encountered such claws without any additional context, you might imagine they belonged to a fearsome predator. That is exactly what early paleontologists thought. The story begins in the deserts of Mongolia during the middle of the 20th century. Soviet expeditions exploring the Gobi Desert were uncovering fossils from the late Cretaceous period, rocks roughly 70 million years old. In 1948, a team led by the Soviet paleontologist Evgeny Maleev discovered several enormous fossil claws along with fragments of forelimb bones. These claws were astonishing. They were strongly curved, razor-sharp along the edges, and far larger than the claws of any known dinosaur at the time. Maleev attempted to determine what sort of creature could possess such unusual structures, but the fossils were incomplete. Without a skull or a full skeleton to study, the claws seemed difficult to place within any known dinosaur group. Their shape suggested powerful grasping ability, yet the bones did not clearly resemble the limbs of familiar carnivorous dinosaurs. Maleev eventually proposed a rather unusual interpretation. He suggested that the claws might belong to a gigantic turtle-like animal that used them to scrape seaweed from the seafloor. The species was named Therizinosaurus cheloniformis, with the second part of the name loosely suggesting turtle-like characteristics. It was an understandable guess, given the limited evidence available at the time. But as more fossils were discovered in Mongolia during later decades, it became increasingly clear that the original interpretation had been incorrect. Therizinosaurus was not a turtle, nor was it a marine animal. Instead, it belonged to a group of dinosaurs that paleontologists now call therizinosaurs. This revelation created an entirely new puzzle, because therizinosaurs themselves were extremely strange creatures. They were members of the theropod lineage, the same broad group of dinosaurs that includes famous predators such as Tyrannosaurus rex and Velociraptor. Theropods are generally characterized by sharp teeth, forward-facing eyes, and bodies adapted for hunting prey. Yet therizinosaurs seem to break many of those rules. Their skulls were relatively small and lightly built. Their teeth were leaf-shaped rather than serrated blades. Their necks were elongated. Their bodies were large and somewhat bulky, and evidence from related species suggests that they were covered in primitive feathers. Most surprisingly of all, their anatomy strongly suggests that they were herbivores. A dinosaur descended from carnivorous predators had somehow evolved into a plant-eater. Understanding how such dramatic dietary shifts occur has become an important topic in modern paleontology. One scientist who has studied this question extensively is Lindsay Zano, a paleontologist at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Zano and her colleagues have analysed fossil evidence across many theropod species to trace how dietary habits changed over evolutionary time. Their research suggests that transitions from carnivory to herbivory occurred more often than previously thought. Certain theropod lineages gradually evolved anatomical traits that made plant consumption easier. Teeth became broader and more suited for slicing vegetation. Necks lengthened, allowing animals to reach foliage. Digestive systems likely adapted to process fibrous plant material. Therizinosaurs appear to represent one of the most extreme examples of this evolutionary transition. Their large bodies, long necks, and relatively small heads resemble those of some herbivorous dinosaurs rather than predatory theropods. Yet their ancestry clearly lies within the carnivorous branch of the dinosaur family tree. This shift illustrates an important evolutionary principle known as exaptation. The concept was formalized by evolutionary biologists Stephen Jay Gould and Elizabeth Verba in the early 1980s. Exaptation describes a process in which a structure that originally evolved for one function later becomes useful for an entirely different purpose. Feathers provide a classic example. In early dinosaurs, feathers may have evolved primarily for insulation or display. Only later did some feathered species adapt those structures for powered flight. Something similar may have occurred with the claws of Therizinosaurus. At first glance, the claws seem perfectly designed for attacking prey. Their size and curvature suggest powerful slashing movements. But if Therizinosaurus was primarily herbivorous, then these claws must have served other roles. One possibility is that they functioned as feeding tools. Large herbivores often need to pull branches closer to their mouths, or strip leaves from vegetation. The long arms and enormous claws of Therizinosaurus may have allowed it to hook branches and draw them within reach. In effect, the claws could have acted like oversized pruning tools, enabling the dinosaur to feed on plants that smaller herbivores could not access. Another possibility involves defense. Even a large herbivore living in the late Cretaceous would have faced predators. The Gobi Desert ecosystem contained formidable carnivorous dinosaurs such as Tarbosaurus, a close relative of Tyrannosaurus. If threatened, a Therizinosaurus swinging its forelimbs could have presented an intimidating barrier. A single swipe from a claw more than a meter long would have been extremely dangerous for any attacker. There is also a third hypothesis that paleontologists sometimes consider when confronted with exaggerated anatomical structures: display. Across the animal kingdom, many species evolve features that serve as visual signals rather than practical tools. The elaborate antlers of deer, the bright plumage of birds of paradise, and the extravagant horns of certain beetles all function partly as displays used in social interactions. Large claws might have served a similar purpose. If Therizinosaurus used its arms in visual displays during mating rituals or territorial encounters, the claws would have made those movements highly conspicuous. A slowly sweeping arm bearing massive curved talons could easily become a dramatic visual signal within a group of animals. It is even possible that the claws served multiple functions simultaneously. Evolution rarely produces structures with only one role. A feature that begins as a feeding adaptation might later assist in defense or communication. Over millions of years, natural selection can refine a structure in ways that allow it to serve several purposes at once. The enormous claws of Therizinosaurus may represent exactly this kind of evolutionary versatility. They remind us that unusual anatomy does not always indicate a predator or a monster. Sometimes it reflects a complex evolutionary history in which ancient structures acquire entirely new roles. In the case of Therizinosaurus, the result was an animal unlike almost any other dinosaur, a descendant of carnivorous hunters that transformed into a towering plant eater, an animal equipped with claws that appear terrifying at first glance, yet may have been used as much for gathering leaves as for defending against enemies, and perhaps most importantly a reminder that evolution often produces creatures far stranger than we might expect. Even among dinosaurs, Therizinosaurus stands as a striking example of how flexible and imaginative the process of evolution can be when given millions of years to explore new possibilities. If Therizinosaurus represents one of the strangest plant-eating dinosaurs ever discovered, then another species challenges an entirely different assumption about prehistoric life. For more than a century, dinosaurs were widely imagined as creatures of the land. They walked, ran, hunted, and grazed across plains, forests, and floodplains. Some may have waded through shallow water, much as modern animals do today, but the general understanding was that dinosaurs remained firmly terrestrial. Then came a creature that forced scientists to reconsider that idea. Its name is Spinosaurus. The story of Spinosaurus begins in North Africa during the early 20th century. At that time, the German paleontologist Ernst Stromer was leading expeditions into the fossil-rich rocks of Egypt. These rocks date back to the late Cretaceous period, roughly 95 million years ago, when much of the region looked very different from the dry desert landscapes seen today. Instead of sand dunes, northern Africa once contained vast river systems, wetlands, and coastal lagoons filled with fish, crocodile-like reptiles, and a diverse array of prehistoric animals. In the year 1912, Stromer and his team discovered unusual fossil remains from these deposits. The bones included parts of a skull, vertebrae, and several long spines projecting upward from the animal's backbone. These spines were extraordinary. Some measured nearly 2 meters in length and appeared to form a tall sail along the dinosaur's back. No other known dinosaur at the time possessed anything quite like it. Stromer described the animal formally in the year 1915 and named it Spinosaurus aegyptiacus. The name translates roughly to spine lizard from Egypt, reflecting the most obvious feature of its anatomy. Based on the fossil evidence available at the time, Stroma reconstructed Spinosaurus as a large predatory dinosaur with a crocodile-like skull and an impressive sail rising above its spine. Yet the specimen remained incomplete, and many aspects of its biology were uncertain. Then, in a tragic twist of history, the original fossils were destroyed. During the Second World War, the museum in Munich where Stroma's specimens were stored was heavily bombed. The Spinosaurus fossils were lost, leaving only Stroma's notes, drawings, and photographs behind. For decades afterward, Spinosaurus remained something of a paleontological mystery. Scientists knew the animal existed, but without the original fossils, its anatomy remained difficult to study in detail. New discoveries began to change that situation in the early 21st century. One of the most significant contributions came from a paleontologist named Nizar Ibrahim, whose research team uncovered additional Spinosaurus fossils in Morocco. These remains included parts of the skull, limbs, and tail, allowing scientists to reconstruct the animal with far greater accuracy than had previously been possible. What Ibrahim and his colleagues discovered was surprising. Many features of Spinosaurus appeared unusually well suited for life in water. Its skull was long and narrow, resembling the snout of a crocodile. The teeth were straight and conical rather than serrated, ideal for gripping slippery prey such as fish. Its nostrils were positioned relatively far back on the skull, a trait seen in several aquatic animals. Even more intriguing were the dinosaurs' bones. The limb bones of Spinosaurus were unusually dense. In aquatic vertebrates such as penguins or hippos, dense bones help counteract buoyancy, allowing the animal to remain submerged more easily. This condition is known as osteosclerosis. Spinosaurus appears to show similar bone structure. Perhaps the most dramatic discovery involved the tail. In 2020, Ibrahim and his colleagues described a newly discovered Spinosaurus tail that looked very different from those of typical theropod dinosaurs. Instead of being narrow and stiff, the tail was tall and flexible, with elongated vertebral spines that created a fin-like shape. Computer modelling suggested that this tail could have generated thrust through the water when moved side to side, functioning in a way somewhat similar to the tail of a crocodile or certain fish. Taken together, these anatomical features suggested something remarkable. Spinosaurus may have spent much of its life in water. The idea of a semi-aquatic dinosaur was unexpected, and it quickly sparked lively discussions among paleontologists. Scientific debates are a normal and healthy part of research, especially when new discoveries challenge long-standing assumptions. Several researchers examined the Spinosaurus evidence and proposed alternative interpretations. Among those who discussed the findings was David Hone, a paleontologist at Queen Mary University of London. Hone and other scientists pointed out that although Spinosaurus shows aquatic adaptations, determining exactly how much time it spent in water requires careful interpretation. Some animals, such as crocodiles, are strongly tied to aquatic environments. Others, like bears, fish frequently, but remain primarily terrestrial. Determining where Spinosaurus falls along this spectrum remains an active topic of research. Another approach to understanding Spinosaurus involves biomechanical analysis. Researchers can create digital models of the dinosaur's skeleton and simulate how its body might have moved through water or across land. This type of work allows scientists to estimate how effective certain anatomical features would have been during swimming or walking. Stephanie Pierce, a vertebrate paleontologist at Harvard University, has conducted extensive research on locomotion in aquatic and semi-aquatic animals. Her work involves comparing skeletal structures across many species to determine how bones and muscles interact during movement. Although Pierce herself has studied a wide range of prehistoric vertebrates, the broader field of locomotion modelling helps scientists evaluate whether animals like Spinosaurus were capable swimmers. Computer simulations suggest that the dinosaur's tail could indeed have generated forward propulsion in water. Meanwhile, its relatively short hind limbs may have reduced drag during swimming. However, the picture is still evolving as new fossils continue to be discovered. Regardless of the exact details, the anatomy of Spinosaurus strongly indicates that it occupied an ecological niche, unlike that of most other known dinosaurs. If the interpretation proves correct, Spinosaurus may represent the closest example we have of a dinosaur that was truly adapted for aquatic life. This would make it something quite remarkable, an evolutionary experiment in which a lineage of large theropod predators gradually adapted to hunt in rivers and lakes rather than on land. The concept of evolutionary experimentation is useful here. Over millions of years, natural selection can push certain lineages toward new ecological roles. If food resources are abundant in a particular environment, animals capable of exploiting those resources gain an advantage. In the case of Spinosaurus, prehistoric river systems teeming with fish may have provided exactly such an opportunity. Instead of competing directly with other large predators for terrestrial prey, Spinosaurus could specialize in aquatic hunting. Its crocodile-shaped jaws, dense bones, and powerful tail may all represent adaptations that made this lifestyle possible. Even the tall sail along its back might have served purposes related to display, thermoregulation, or species recognition, although scientists continue to study its exact function. When one steps back and considers the broader picture, Spinosaurus illustrates something important about the flexibility of evolution. Dinosaurs were not confined to a single ecological template. Given enough time, their bodies adapted to a wide variety of environments. Some became enormous plant-eaters capable of reaching the tops of ancient forests. Others evolved armor and defensive weapons. And at least one lineage appears to have ventured into the water, developing anatomical traits that allowed it to thrive in aquatic habitats. If dinosaurs once dominated the land, Spinosaurus suggests that they may also have briefly explored life beneath the surface of prehistoric rivers. An enormous predator gliding silently through ancient waterways, its tall sail rising above the waterline like the fin of some gigantic prehistoric fish. It is an image that would have seemed improbable not very long ago, yet the fossil record continues to reveal that the dinosaur world was filled with surprises far beyond the expectations of earlier generations of scientists. For much of the 20th century, the story of flight in prehistoric animals seemed fairly straightforward. Birds were the only dinosaurs that had truly mastered the skies. Their ancestors had gradually evolved feathers, lightweight skeletons, and powerful flight muscles, eventually producing the birds that fill our modern forests and skies today. Other prehistoric creatures had flown as well, of course. Pterosaurs, for example, ruled the air long before birds became common. But pterosaurs were not dinosaurs. They belonged to a separate branch of reptile evolution. The prevailing view was that within the dinosaur lineage itself, flight evolved along a single path. Then a small fossil from northeastern China complicated that story in a rather dramatic way. In the year 2015, paleontologist Xu Xing and his colleagues from the Chinese Academy of Sciences described an unusual dinosaur discovered in the fossil-rich rocks of Liaoning province. The animal was named Yixi. The name is surprisingly simple. In Mandarin Chinese, Yixi roughly translates to strange wing. It is difficult to imagine a more appropriate description. Yixi lived during the late Jurassic period, roughly 160 million years ago. In life, it was a relatively small animal, perhaps about the size of a pigeon, with a lightweight skeleton and a body likely covered in primitive feathers. At first glance, that description might sound fairly typical for small feathered dinosaurs discovered in the region. But Yixi possessed a feature that no one had ever seen before in a dinosaur. Extending from its wrist was a long, slender bone that pointed outward and slightly backward. This structure, known as a styliform rod, was not part of the typical dinosaur skeleton. It was an additional support element that appears to have helped stretch a membrane of skin between the animal's arm and its body. In other words, Yixi seems to have possessed wings supported partly by skin membranes rather than feathers. This is a design far more reminiscent of bats or pterosaurs than of birds. To understand why this is so unusual, it helps to briefly consider how bird wings function. Bird wings rely on feathers attached along the forelimb and hand. These feathers overlap in carefully arranged layers that create a broad, aerodynamic surface capable of generating lift. When air flows across this surface during flight, pressure differences form above and below the wing, allowing the bird to remain airborne. The physics behind lift can be summarized by an equation commonly used in aerodynamics. Lift equals 1/2 multiplied by air density, multiplied by velocity squared, multiplied by wing area, multiplied by the lift coefficient. Each component plays an important role. Air density determines how much force the atmosphere can exert on a wing. Velocity represents the speed of airflow. Wing area defines the surface interacting with that air, while the lift coefficient reflects the aerodynamic shape of the wing itself. Bird wings achieve effective lift largely through feathered surfaces arranged to maximize that aerodynamic efficiency. Yixi, however, appears to have taken a very different approach. The styliform rod extending from its wrist likely supported a thin membrane of skin similar to the wing membrane of a bat. This membrane would have stretched between the rod, the forelimb, and parts of the body, forming a flexible surface capable of interacting with the surrounding air. Because the fossil is preserved in the fine sediments of the Leoning deposits, scientists were able to detect traces of this soft tissue structure. These discoveries suggested something extraordinary. At least one lineage of dinosaurs had experimented with a completely different type of wing. Understanding whether this wing actually allowed the animal to fly requires careful scientific analysis. One researcher who has studied this question in detail is Michael Pittman of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Pittman and his colleagues have used aerodynamic modelling techniques to examine how Yichi might have moved through the air. By digitally reconstructing the skeleton and estimating the possible shapes of the wing membranes, they created computer simulations that test different flight scenarios. These models suggest that Yichi may not have been capable of sustained powered flight like modern birds. Instead, it likely functioned as a glider, launching from trees and gliding between branches in forested environments. Gliding animals rely on gravity to provide forward motion, while their wings generate lift that slows their descent. Modern flying squirrels, for example, glide through forests using skin membranes stretched between their limbs. Yichi may have used a similar strategy. From a high branch, it could leap into the air, spread its membrane-supported wings, and glide across the forest canopy before landing on another tree. If this interpretation is correct, Yichi represents a fascinating evolutionary experiment. It demonstrates that dinosaurs were exploring multiple possible solutions to the challenge of moving through the air. This brings us to an important concept in evolutionary biology known as convergent evolution. Convergent evolution occurs when unrelated organisms independently evolve similar structures or behaviors because they face comparable environmental challenges. Wings provide one of the clearest examples of this principle. Birds, bats, and pterosaurs all evolve the ability to fly, yet their wings are constructed in very different ways. Bird wings rely on feathers attached to modified forelimbs. Bat wings use elongated finger bones supporting skin membranes. Pterosaur wings stretch a membrane primarily along a greatly elongated fourth finger. Each lineage arrived at flight through its own evolutionary pathway. Yichi suggests that dinosaurs themselves may have experimented with more than one aerodynamic strategy before the feathered wing of birds became dominant. In other words, early dinosaur evolution may have included several attempts at aerial locomotion. Some lineages developed feather-based wings that eventually led to true powered flight in birds. Others, like Yichi, may have evolved membrane-supported wings suited for gliding. Over time, natural selection would favour designs that proved most efficient or adaptable. Feathered wings offered advantages such as structural flexibility, insulation, and improved control during flight. Membrane-based wings may have been less effective for sustained aerial movement in small dinosaurs. As a result, the feathered wing design eventually became the dominant solution within the dinosaur lineage. Yet the existence of Yichi reminds us that evolution rarely follows a single predetermined path. Instead, it explores multiple possibilities. Some experiments succeed and persist for millions of years. Others appear briefly, leaving behind only a few fossils as evidence of their existence. Yichi belongs to this second category, a small dinosaur with an unusual wing design, living quietly among the trees of Jurassic forests. Its strange anatomy reveals that the journey toward flight was not a simple straight line. It was a branching exploration filled with unexpected variations, creative solutions, and evolutionary ideas that nature tested long before humans ever began to study them. And occasionally, those ideas produced creatures so unusual that even today they seem almost impossible at first glance. Among the many long-necked dinosaurs that once wandered across prehistoric landscapes, one species stands out as particularly unusual. Its body followed the familiar pattern of a sauropod dinosaur, with a relatively small head perched at the end of a long neck, and supported by a massive body and sturdy limbs. Yet when paleontologists began studying its skull, they discovered a feeding system unlike anything previously seen in dinosaurs. This animal is known as Nigersaurus. Nigersaurus lived during the Middle Cretaceous period, roughly 115 million years ago, in what is now the Republic of Niger in northern Africa. At that time, the region was not the arid desert landscape seen today. Instead, it contained broad river systems, lush vegetation, and a variety of plant life that would have provided food for large herbivorous animals. The dinosaur was first described scientifically in the late 20th century, but it gained widespread attention through the work of the American paleontologist Paul Sereno from the University of Chicago. Sereno and his research team conducted expeditions into the Sahara Desert and uncovered remarkably well-preserved fossils that revealed the animal's extraordinary skull structure. At first glance, Nigersaurus might appear somewhat modest compared to the enormous sauropods that dominate museum exhibits. Its body length was likely around 9 meters, which is still quite large but considerably smaller than giants like Argentinosaurus or Diplodocus. What truly sets Nigersaurus apart lies in the shape and construction of its head. Most sauropods possess relatively narrow skulls with jaws that extend forward in a gentle curve. Their teeth are typically arranged in rows suited for stripping leaves from branches. Nigersaurus took a dramatically different approach. Its skull was extremely lightweight and delicate, filled with large openings that reduced the amount of bone required to support the structure. This made the skull somewhat fragile, yet it also reduced the weight at the end of the long neck. But the most striking feature was the jaw itself. Instead of a narrow mouth, Nigersaurus possessed an unusually wide and straight muzzle that formed a broad horizontal edge across the front of the skull. Paleontologists sometimes describe the shape as resembling the opening of a vacuum cleaner. This comparison may sound humorous, but it captures something important about how the animal likely fed. Along this broad jawline sat an extraordinary array of teeth. Nigersaurus did not have the typical arrangement of a few dozen teeth like many other dinosaurs. Instead, its jaws contained hundreds of extremely small teeth, organized into tightly packed rows. In fact, the tooth batteries of Nigersaurus were so dense that at any given moment more than 500 teeth could be present within its jaws. These teeth were arranged in vertical stacks, with new teeth forming beneath older ones and gradually moving into position as the older teeth wore down. To understand how this system worked, researchers turned to modern imaging technology. Computed tomography scanning, often called CT scanning, allowed scientists to examine the interior of Nigersaurus fossils without damaging them. By sending X-rays through the fossil and reconstructing the internal structures digitally, researchers could visualize layers of developing teeth hidden inside the jawbone. These scans revealed something remarkable. Nigersaurus replaced its teeth at an astonishing rate. While many dinosaurs replaced teeth throughout their lives, the rate of replacement in Nigersaurus appears to have been unusually rapid. Estimates suggest that each individual tooth may have been replaced roughly every 2 weeks. That means the dinosaur maintained a constant supply of fresh teeth ready to take the place of those worn down by feeding. Such rapid tooth replacement suggests that Nigersaurus was consuming vegetation that caused significant wear on its teeth. Plants often contain microscopic particles of silica, particularly in grasses and other tough vegetation. These particles act somewhat like sandpaper when animals chew them. Modern grazing mammals, such as horses and cattle, show similar adaptations with teeth designed to withstand constant abrasion. The feeding strategy of Nigersaurus likely involved sweeping its wide muzzle close to the ground and cropping low-growing plants. Its head was naturally angled downward, allowing the dinosaur to graze efficiently across the landscape. Research into the biomechanics of sauropod feeding has been conducted by paleontologists such as Jeffrey Wilson Mantilla from the University of Michigan. Wilson Mantilla studies the skeletal structure and functional anatomy of sauropods in order to understand how their bodies supported different feeding strategies. His work suggests that sauropods evolved a wide variety of methods for gathering plant material. Some species used long necks to reach high into the canopy of ancient forests. Others specialized in mid-level browsing. Nigersaurus appears to have occupied a different niche altogether. Its feeding system was designed for ground-level grazing. Imagine a herd of these dinosaurs moving slowly across a prehistoric floodplain, their wide mouths sweeping across patches of vegetation, continuously replacing worn teeth as they fed. The structure of the skull suggests a highly specialized feeding apparatus, one that may have allowed Nigersaurus to process large quantities of plant material very efficiently. This kind of specialization illustrates an important principle in evolutionary biology. Over time, natural selection can push certain species toward increasingly narrow ecological roles. When a particular feeding strategy proves successful, anatomical adaptations that improve efficiency in that role may be favored generation after generation. The result can be an organism that becomes extremely well suited to a specific task. In the case of Nigersaurus, that task appears to have been harvesting large amounts of low-growing vegetation. Yet specialization can also involve trade-offs. The skull of Nigersaurus was extremely delicate compared to many other dinosaurs. Its thin bones likely could not withstand powerful biting forces, but that was not necessary for an animal that primarily consumed soft plant material. Instead of strength, the skull emphasized lightness and efficiency. This delicate construction also explains why fossils of Nigersaurus are relatively rare. Fragile bones are less likely to survive the long process of fossilization. When paleontologists finally uncovered well-preserved specimens, they revealed a dinosaur that seemed almost improbably specialized. A long-necked herbivore equipped with a wide grazing mouth filled with hundreds of constantly replaced teeth. At first glance, the design may appear unusual, even slightly comical. Yet from an evolutionary perspective, it represents a highly refined feeding machine. Nigersaurus demonstrates that dinosaur evolution was not limited to producing large bodies or powerful predators. It also produced animals with remarkably intricate solutions to the everyday challenge of eating. And sometimes those solutions resulted in creatures whose anatomy feels surprisingly inventive. A dinosaur that grazed like a prehistoric lawnmower, quietly sweeping the ground for vegetation millions of years before the first grass-cutting machine ever appeared. Among the many peculiar shapes found in the dinosaur world, few are quite as distinctive as a thick, rounded dome of solid bone sitting directly on top of an animal's skull. At first glance, such a structure almost looks like a helmet. This remarkable feature belongs to a group of dinosaurs known as pachycephalosaurs, and the most famous member of this group carries the name Pachycephalosaurus wyomingensis. The name itself comes from Greek roots meaning thick-headed lizard, which is an unusually direct description for a dinosaur. Pachycephalosaurus lived during the late Cretaceous period, roughly 66 million years ago, near the very end of the age of dinosaurs. Fossils of this species have been discovered in parts of what is now the western United States, including regions of Wyoming, Montana, and South Dakota. Compared to many other dinosaurs, Pachycephalosaurus was not especially large. It may have measured around 4 to 5 meters in length and walked on 2 hind legs, balancing its body with a long tail. Its most striking feature was its skull. The top of the skull formed a thick dome composed of solid bone that could reach nearly 25 centimeters in thickness. This dome was surrounded by small bony bumps and knobs known as osteoderms, creating a rugged crown of protrusions along the edges. When paleontologists first studied these skulls, one obvious question emerged: why would a dinosaur evolve such a heavily reinforced head? One of the earliest and most popular ideas was that pachycephalosaurs used their domes for head-to-head combat. The concept is easy to visualize: 2 individuals facing each other, lowering their heads, and charging forward in a dramatic collision, much like modern bighorn sheep. This head-butting hypothesis has remained influential for decades, yet testing such an idea requires careful scientific investigation rather than simple imagination. Researchers need to examine the anatomy of the skull, the arrangement of neck muscles, and the structure of the vertebrae that would absorb the forces of impact. Mark Goodwin, a paleontologist at the University of California Museum of Paleontology in Berkeley, has studied pachycephalosaur skulls in great detail. Goodwin and his colleagues have examined fossils representing individuals of different ages in order to understand how the dome developed during growth. Their research revealed that the dome was not present in young individuals. Instead, juvenile pachycephalosaurs had relatively flat skulls with spikes and nodes along the edges. As the animals matured, the dome gradually thickened and expanded. This developmental pattern suggests that the dome played an important role later in life, possibly connected to adult social behavior. However, Goodwin's work also raised questions about whether the dome was actually used for direct head-to-head collisions. Some researchers argue that the internal structure of the bone might not be ideally suited for absorbing repeated high-impact blows. Instead, they suggest that the domes may have been used in flank-butting behavior, where individuals struck each other along the sides of the body rather than directly head-on. This interpretation would still involve physical competition, but with a somewhat different style of interaction. Another possibility involves visual signaling rather than combat. Across the natural world, many animals evolve exaggerated physical features that function primarily as displays. Bright feathers, large antlers, and elaborate horns often serve as signals that communicate strength, health, or maturity to other members of the same species. Understanding why such features evolve brings us to an important concept in evolutionary biology known as costly signaling theory. The idea was proposed by the Israeli evolutionary biologist Amot Zahavi during the 1970s. Zahavi suggested that certain traits evolve precisely because they are costly to produce or maintain. A costly trait acts as an honest signal of fitness. If an animal can afford to grow and carry an elaborate structure that requires energy and resources, it demonstrates that the individual is strong enough to survive despite that cost. The extravagant tail feathers of a peacock provide a well-known example. The feathers are large and visually impressive, but they also make the bird more visible to predators. Only the healthiest males can sustain such a burden while still surviving long enough to reproduce. If pachycephalosaur domes functioned as costly signals, they may have communicated information about an individual's strength or maturity to potential mates or rivals. The thicker and more symmetrical the dome, the more impressive the signal might appear to other members of the species. Another possible function relates to species recognition. During the late Cretaceous period, multiple pachycephalosaur species may have lived in overlapping habitats. Distinctive skull shapes could have helped individuals recognize members of their own species, reducing confusion during mating or territorial encounters. This idea is supported by the wide variety of dome shapes and ornamental patterns found among different pachycephalosaur fossils. Some species possessed tall rounded domes, others had flatter skulls with more pronounced spikes and knobs. These variations suggest that visual appearance may have played a role in social communication. Of course, these explanations are not mutually exclusive. Evolution often produces structures that serve more than one function. A dome-shaped skull could have been used occasionally in physical competition, while also acting as a visual signal during social interactions. Over time, natural selection may have favoured individuals whose domes were particularly effective in both roles. The influence of sexual selection is especially important here. Sexual selection is a specific form of natural selection that focuses on traits influencing reproductive success rather than simple survival. Features that help an individual attract mates or outcompete rivals can become exaggerated over generations, even if those traits provide little advantage in other aspects of life. Many animals display characteristics shaped by sexual selection. Male deer grow enormous antlers used in combat and display. Certain birds develop bright plumage that attracts mates. Some insects evolve elaborate horns or structures used in competition. If pachycephalosaur domes were influenced by sexual selection, their dramatic thickness and shape may reflect the outcome of countless generations of social competition. Each generation slightly exaggerating the trait until the skull became one of the most unusual structures found in the dinosaur world. What makes Pachycephalosaurus particularly fascinating is that its dome remains something of a scientific mystery. Despite decades of study, paleontologists continue to debate exactly how these animals used their remarkable skulls. Did they charge headfirst into rivals across ancient plains? Did they strike each other along the sides like living battering rams? Or did their domes function primarily as visual signals, silently communicating strength and maturity within dinosaur herds? The truth may involve elements of all three possibilities. What is clear is that Pachycephalosaurus represents another example of how evolution can produce anatomical designs that seem almost improbable at first glance. A dinosaur walking on two legs with a thick helmet of bone atop its head, carrying a structure that may have been shaped by competition, display, and the subtle forces of evolutionary signalling. In the prehistoric landscapes of the late Cretaceous, such a creature would certainly have stood out among its neighbours, and its unusual skull reminds us that some of the most fascinating features in the animal kingdom arise not simply from survival alone, but from the complex social lives of the creatures that possess them. Among the many giant plant-eating dinosaurs that once wandered across prehistoric landscapes, sauropods are perhaps the most instantly recognizable. Their enormous bodies, pillar-like legs, and long sweeping necks have become icons of the age of dinosaurs. Creatures such as Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, and Apatosaurus appear in museums and documentaries as gentle giants slowly browsing ancient forests. At first glance, many sauropods appear broadly similar. Long necks extend from massive bodies, allowing these animals to reach vegetation that other herbivores could not easily access. Their tails stretch behind them as balancing counterweights, and their heads remain relatively small compared to their immense bulk. Yet even within this familiar body plan, evolution sometimes produced surprising variations. One of the most unusual examples comes from South America and carries the name Amargasaurus. Amargasaurus kazaui lived during the early Cretaceous period, roughly 130 million years ago. Fossils of this dinosaur were discovered in Argentina and formally described by the Argentine paleontologist José Bonaparte in the year 1984. Bonaparte was one of the most influential figures in South American paleontology, responsible for identifying numerous dinosaur species that helped reveal the extraordinary diversity of prehistoric life on that continent. When Bonaparte and his colleagues examined the skeleton of Amargasaurus, they immediately noticed something striking about its neck. Running along the top of the neck were two parallel rows of elongated spines projecting upward from the vertebrae. These spines were not small decorative bumps. Some extended more than 60 centimeters above the backbone, forming a pair of tall ridges that followed the length of the neck. Imagine a dinosaur with a long neck crowned by two rows of thin, bony projections, rising like the prongs of an enormous fork. It is a dramatic silhouette. Structures like these naturally raise an important question. What were they for? In many animals, exaggerated anatomical features serve important biological functions. Determining those functions, however, requires careful study of the bones, surrounding tissues, and the broader evolutionary context. One possibility is that the spine supported keratin-covered spikes. Keratin is the same tough material that forms the horns of cattle, the claws of animals, and the outer layer of human fingernails. If the spines of Amargasaurus were covered in keratin sheaths, the resulting structures might have formed a row of sharp spikes along the dinosaur's neck. Such spikes could potentially provide protection against predators. A carnivorous dinosaur attempting to bite or grapple with Amargasaurus might have encountered a forest of rigid defensive spikes along the neck. Another possibility involves the presence of a sail. Some prehistoric animals possessed sails formed by elongated spines connected by skin membranes. The well-known Permian predator Dimetrodon, which lived long before dinosaurs appeared, carried such a sail along its back. If a similar membrane stretched between the spines of Amargasaurus, it could have formed a tall double sail running along the neck. Sails in prehistoric animals have often been interpreted as thermoregulatory structures. Thermoregulation refers to the ability of an organism to control its body temperature. A large surface area exposed to sunlight can absorb heat, while exposure to air can allow excess heat to dissipate. By adjusting its position relative to the sun, an animal with a sail might influence how quickly its body warmed or cooled. However, the structure of the Amargasaurus spines raises questions about this idea. The spines are paired and arranged quite close together, which might limit the effectiveness of a sail compared to the broader structures seen in some other animals. Another possibility is that the spine supported a crest or display structure used for visual communication. Many herbivorous animals evolve exaggerated features that function primarily as signals rather than weapons or tools. Bright colors, tall crests, and elaborate horns often serve to attract mates or intimidate rivals. In the prehistoric world, where visual signals might travel across open floodplains or forest clearings, such structures could be particularly useful. If the spines of Amargasaurus supported skin or keratin structures with distinctive colors or patterns, they might have created a highly visible display along the neck. Imagine sunlight catching the ridged outline of those twin spines as the animal moved slowly through ancient vegetation. Such a feature would make Amargasaurus instantly recognizable to others of its species. Understanding the biomechanics of sauropod necks has become an important area of research in recent years. One scientist who has contributed significantly to this field is Michael Taylor of the University of Bristol. Taylor studies how the bones and joints of sauropod necks functioned in life. By examining vertebrae, muscle attachment points, and patterns of movement, researchers can estimate how flexible these enormous necks were and how they supported the weight of the head. Sauropod necks are remarkable engineering structures. In some species, the neck could extend more than 10 meters in length. Supporting such a structure requires careful distribution of weight and strength. Vertebrae contain air-filled cavities that reduce mass while maintaining structural integrity. These adaptations allowed sauropods to evolve extremely long necks without collapsing under their own weight. In the case of Amargasaurus, the presence of tall spines adds another layer of complexity to the design. The spines themselves would have been supported by strong ligaments and muscles that helped stabilize the neck during movement. Whatever their precise function, these structures were clearly integrated into the animal's anatomy, rather than being fragile ornaments. This leads to a broader evolutionary question. Why do large herbivores sometimes evolve exaggerated anatomical features? One explanation involves the concept of sexual selection, where certain traits become amplified because they help individuals attract mates or compete with rivals. Over many generations, such traits can become increasingly dramatic. Another factor may involve species recognition. In ecosystems where several similar species coexist, distinctive physical features can help individuals identify members of their own species quickly. This reduces confusion during mating and social interactions. In large herbivores that travel in groups, visual signals may play an important role in maintaining social cohesion. There is also the possibility that exaggerated structures serve multiple purposes at once. A crest or spine that functions primarily as a display could also provide some level of defense or assist with thermoregulation. Evolution often produces solutions that balance several different functions simultaneously. Amargasaurus stands as a striking example of this evolutionary creativity. A relatively modest-sized sauropod, yet crowned with twin rows of elongated neck spines that make it instantly distinctive among dinosaurs. Whether those spines supported sharp keratin spikes, thin sail-like membranes, or colourful display structures, they remind us that even within the familiar body plans of giant herbivores, evolution found ways to produce unexpected forms. In the prehistoric landscapes of early Cretaceous South America, a herd of these dinosaurs moving across the plains would have presented a remarkable sight. Long necks rising above the vegetation, each one crowned with paired spines that traced elegant ridges against the sky, a reminder that the dinosaur world was not only vast and ancient, but also filled with anatomical designs that continue to puzzle and fascinate scientists today. In the world of paleontology, some discoveries arrive as complete skeletons, neatly preserved and ready to tell their story. Others arrive in fragments, leaving scientists with only a handful of clues and a great deal of imagination. One of the most famous examples of this second category is a dinosaur known as Dinocairus. The name Dinocairus mirificus translates to something like remarkable terrible hand, which sounds dramatic but also happens to be a very literal description of what was first discovered. The story begins in the deserts of Mongolia during the 1960s. At that time, a series of joint Polish and Mongolian expeditions were exploring the fossil-rich rocks of the Gobi Desert. These expeditions uncovered many remarkable dinosaur fossils, but one discovery in particular puzzled scientists for decades. In the year 1965, paleontologists discovered a pair of enormous fossilized forelimbs. These arms were astonishing. Each limb measured more than 2 meters in length, and at the end of each arm were 3 massive claws. The bones were thick and powerful, suggesting an animal of considerable size. Yet aside from these arms and a few fragments of shoulder bones, almost nothing else of the skeleton was present. No skull, no tail, no legs, just the arms. The fossils were eventually studied by the Polish paleontologist Halska Osmolska and her colleagues, who formally described the animal in the year 1970. Based on the enormous forelimbs, they gave it the name Dinocairus. But the identity of the animal remained a mystery. Without the rest of the skeleton, paleontologists could only speculate about what the creature looked like. Some imagined it as a giant predatory dinosaur similar to Tyrannosaurus, using its long arms to grasp prey. Others thought it might belong to a different group of theropods entirely. For many years, the arms of Dinocairus became something of a legend in paleontology. Museum displays sometimes featured the giant limbs mounted dramatically against blank space, leaving visitors to wonder what sort of dinosaur could possess such unusual appendages. And for nearly half a century, that question remained unanswered. Then, during the early 21st century, new discoveries finally began to reveal the truth. Additional Dinocairus fossils were uncovered in Mongolia, including more complete skeletons that filled in the missing pieces of the puzzle. These fossils were studied by an international research team led by the South Korean paleontologist Yongnam Lee. When Lee and his colleagues carefully examined the new material, the results surprised many scientists. Dinocairus turned out to be far stranger than anyone had imagined. Instead of a sleek predator with powerful jaws, Dinocairus possessed a long duck-shaped snout. Its skull was relatively narrow and toothless, suggesting a feeding strategy very different from that of typical carnivorous theropods. The body was large and somewhat bulky, reaching lengths of around 11 meters. Its back supported a tall hump formed by elongated vertebrae. giving the dinosaur a distinctive silhouette. Even the feet were unusual. Rather than the narrow claws often associated with predators, Dinosaurs had broad, flat feet that may have helped it move across soft or muddy ground. All of these features combined to create an animal that seemed almost mismatched, as though pieces of several different dinosaurs had been assembled together. A long-armed theropod with a duck-like bill, a hump-backed body, and a mixture of anatomical traits that suggested a complex lifestyle. One clue about its diet came from the contents of its fossilized stomach. Inside the ribcage of one specimen, paleontologists discovered the remains of fish bones and small stones known as gastroliths. Gastroliths are stones swallowed by animals to help grind food inside the digestive system. Many modern birds use them to break down tough plant material. This combination of fish remains and gastroliths suggests that Dinosaurs may have been an omnivore, feeding on both aquatic animals and vegetation. In other words, it was neither a pure predator nor a pure herbivore. Instead, it may have occupied a flexible ecological role within its environment, gathering a variety of foods along riverbanks and wetlands. Understanding how scientists determine these relationships between species brings us to an important concept in paleontology known as cladistic analysis. Cladistics is a method of studying evolutionary relationships based on shared anatomical characteristics. The approach was pioneered by the German entomologist Willi Hennig in the mid-20th century. Hennig proposed that organisms should be grouped according to common ancestry rather than superficial similarity. By identifying shared derived traits known as synapomorphies, scientists can construct branching diagrams called cladograms that represent evolutionary relationships. In practice, this means carefully comparing anatomical features across many species. For example, paleontologists might examine the structure of the pelvis, the arrangement of wrist bones, or the shape of the skull. By analysing these traits across numerous fossils, they can determine which species are most closely related. Using cladistic analysis, researchers eventually placed Dinosaurs within a group of dinosaurs known as ornithomimosaurs. Ornithomimosaurs are sometimes called ostrich-mimic dinosaurs because many species possess long legs, lightweight bodies, and bird-like proportions. However, Dinosaurs represents one of the most unusual members of this group. Its massive size and unusual anatomy make it stand apart from its relatives. The long arms that first attracted attention may have been useful for gathering vegetation or manipulating food. The duck-like snout could have allowed the animal to forage in shallow water, snapping up fish or aquatic plants. Its broad feet may have helped it move through muddy wetlands without sinking too deeply into the soft ground. Taken together, these features suggest an animal adapted to life near water, perhaps spending much of its time wandering along riverbanks in search of food. The long mystery surrounding Dinosaurs also illustrates an important challenge in paleontology. Fossils are often incomplete. A skeleton may be missing critical parts, or bones may be scattered across different locations. When scientists attempt to reconstruct an extinct animal from partial remains, interpretations can easily change as new evidence emerges. The early discovery of only the arms led paleontologists to imagine a very different animal than the one eventually revealed by more complete fossils. This does not mean that early scientists were careless. Instead, it highlights the nature of scientific investigation. Hypotheses are formed based on available evidence. When new data appears, those hypotheses are refined or replaced. Over time, the scientific picture becomes clearer. In the case of Dinosaurs, it took nearly 50 years for enough fossils to emerge from the Gobi Desert to reveal the true shape of the animal. What began as two mysterious arms eventually transformed into one of the strangest dinosaurs ever discovered. A towering omnivore with a humpbacked body, broad feet, and a long bill shaped like that of a duck. And perhaps most intriguingly, a reminder that sometimes the fossil record keeps its secrets for decades, before finally revealing the full story hidden within ancient stone. Among the many herbivorous dinosaurs that lived during the late Cretaceous period, a few species evolved a level of physical protection that seems almost excessive at first glance. Their bodies were covered in armor plates, their backs were reinforced with bony shields, and some even carried what looked like a medieval mace at the end of their tails. These remarkable animals belong to a group known as ankylosaurs. The name Ankylosaurus itself comes from Greek words meaning fused lizard, referring to the way many of the bones in the skull and body were tightly joined together to create an exceptionally solid structure. The most famous species, Ankylosaurus magniventris, lived roughly 68 to 66 million years ago in what is now Western North America. At first glance, Ankylosaurus appears almost like a living tank. Its body was low and broad, supported by sturdy legs positioned beneath a wide, heavy torso. The head sat close to the ground, protected by thick, bony plates that fused into a protective shield over the skull. Along the back ran rows of armoured structures embedded within the skin. These structures are known as osteoderms. The word osteoderm literally means bone skin, and it describes small plates of bone that form within the skin itself rather than being part of the main skeleton. Many modern animals possess osteoderms. Crocodiles, for example, carry bony plates beneath their scales that help protect them from injury. Ankylosaurs took this concept to an extreme. Across their backs and flanks, large osteoderms formed a continuous defensive covering. Some were flat plates, others rose into spikes or knobs. The arrangement created a mosaic of armour that would have made it extremely difficult for predators to penetrate the dinosaur's body with a bite. But the defensive features of ankylosaurs did not end with passive protection. Some species developed a powerful weapon at the end of the tail. The tail club of Ankylosaurus consisted of several vertebrae fused together into a stiff handle, with large bony knobs forming a heavy mass at the tip. This structure created what paleontologists sometimes describe as a biological hammer. When swung with sufficient force, the club could deliver a powerful blow to an attacking predator. Understanding how such a structure functioned requires careful analysis of the bones and joints involved. One scientist who has contributed significantly to this area of research is Victoria Arbour, a paleontologist who has studied ankylosaur anatomy in detail. Arbour and her colleagues have examined fossilized tail vertebrae and the arrangement of muscles that would have powered the tail's movement. Their work suggests that ankylosaurs possess specialized tendons and ligaments that stiffened the tail, allowing the club to swing with considerable force. Biomechanical studies estimate that the impact of a well-placed strike could have been strong enough to break bones in an attacking predator. Imagine a large carnivorous dinosaur approaching an ankylosaur in search of an easy meal. Instead of a vulnerable herbivore, the predator encounters an animal covered in armour and equipped with a heavy tail club capable of delivering a defensive strike. A poorly timed attack could easily result in a fractured leg or ribs, injuries that might prove fatal for a hunter dependent on mobility. In this way, ankylosaurs illustrate a powerful principle in evolutionary biology. The development of defensive adaptations often occurs alongside the evolution of increasingly effective predators. As predators evolve sharper teeth, stronger jaws, and improved hunting strategies, prey species may evolve thicker armour, greater speed, or more sophisticated defensive behaviours. This ongoing interaction is sometimes described using a concept known as the Red Queen hypothesis. The Red Queen hypothesis was proposed by the evolutionary biologist Lee Van Volen in the early 1970s. The name comes from a scene in the novel Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll, where the Red Queen tells Alice that it takes all the running you can do just to stay in the same place. Van Volen used this metaphor to describe evolutionary competition. In ecosystems where predators and prey influence each other's survival, both sides must continually evolve new adaptations simply to maintain their relative positions. If predators become more effective hunters, prey species must improve their defenses. If prey develops stronger defenses, predators must adapt new strategies to overcome them. Neither side ever truly wins. Instead, they remain locked in a dynamic evolutionary arms race. The heavy armour and tail clubs of ankylosaurs likely represent one side of this evolutionary contest. During the late Cretaceous, ecosystems included large predators such as Tyrannosaurus rex and other powerful theropods. These hunters possess strong jaws, serrated teeth, and the ability to deliver crushing bites. Against such formidable opponents, passive defenses alone might not be enough. The ankylosaur solution was to combine protection with active defense. Its low body shape made it difficult for predators to flip the animal over. Thick armour plates shielded vulnerable areas, and the heavy tail club provided a way to strike back if an attacker came too close. In some respects, the strategy resembles the defensive behaviour of certain modern animals. Porcupines, for example, rely on sharp quills that discourage predators from biting. Armadillos possess bony armour that protects their bodies. Even some lizards use their tails as defensive weapons when threatened. Ankylosaurs combined several of these strategies into a single evolutionary package: a body designed to resist attack, and a tail capable of delivering a painful response. Yet these defensive adaptations may also have served additional roles beyond predator deterrence. Some paleontologists have suggested that ankylosaur tail clubs could have been used during interactions between members of the same species. Just as modern animals sometimes engage in ritualized combat to establish dominance, ankylosaurs might have used their tails during disputes over territory or mating opportunities. Although direct fossil evidence for such behavior is limited, the possibility highlights an important point. Anatomical structures often evolve under multiple selective pressures. A weapon that deters predators might also prove useful in social competition. Over millions of years, natural selection refines these structures into increasingly specialized forms. In the case of ankylosaurs, the result was one of the most heavily defended animals ever to walk the earth. A plant-eating dinosaur equipped with armor plating and a powerful tail weapon, capable of standing its ground even in a landscape populated by giant predators. Far from being passive victims of prehistoric hunters, ankylosaurs represent a successful evolutionary strategy built around resilience and defense. Their fossils remind us that survival in ancient ecosystems often depended not only on speed or aggression, but also on the ability to withstand attack and strike back when necessary. And in the long evolutionary contest between predator and prey, ankylosaurs clearly came prepared. Few dinosaurs have experienced a reputation change quite as dramatic as that of Oviraptor. Its name translates directly to egg thief, a label that suggests sneaky behavior and stolen meals. For many years, this dinosaur was portrayed as a prehistoric criminal, creeping into nests to steal eggs from other species. Yet modern discoveries have revealed a very different story. In fact, Oviraptor may not have been an egg thief at all. Instead, it appears to have been something far more familiar and surprisingly gentle, a devoted parent. The story begins in the 1920s, during a series of expeditions into the Gobi Desert, led by the American explorer Roy Chapman Andrews. Andrews worked with the American Museum of Natural History and organized several ambitious scientific expeditions across Mongolia in search of dinosaur fossils. These journeys were filled with dramatic discoveries. The teams uncovered fossilized dinosaur eggs, skeletons, and entire nests preserved in the desert rock. At the time, the discovery of dinosaur eggs was particularly exciting because it provided rare evidence about how dinosaurs reproduced. During one of these expeditions, scientists discovered the skeleton of a strange dinosaur lying close to a nest of fossilized eggs. The animal had a short-beaked skull and a crest rising from the top of its head. Because the skeleton was found directly above the eggs, researchers assumed that the dinosaur had been caught in the act of stealing them. This interpretation seemed reasonable based on the information available at the time. As a result, the species was given the name Oviraptor philoceratops. The name literally means egg thief that loves ceratopsian eggs, referring to the assumption that the eggs belonged to a horned dinosaur similar to Protoceratops. For decades, this image remained firmly established in paleontology. Illustrations in books often showed Oviraptor sneaking into nests while angry parent dinosaurs returned to defend their eggs. It was an appealing narrative, and it fit neatly with the idea of dinosaurs behaving like opportunistic predators. But science has a habit of revisiting old assumptions when new evidence appears. Over time, paleontologists discovered additional nests associated with Oviraptor and related species. Some of these nests contained remarkably preserved skeletons positioned directly above the eggs. Instead of appearing to steal them, the dinosaurs seemed to be sitting on the nests. Their arms were spread outward in a protective posture, and their bodies were positioned as though covering the eggs. This discovery raised an entirely different possibility. Rather than raiding nests, Oviraptor might have been incubating its own eggs. Further analysis confirmed that the eggs originally attributed to other species actually belonged to Oviraptor itself. The animal had been protecting its offspring all along. One researcher who has studied dinosaur nesting behavior extensively is the paleontologist David Verricchio from Montana State University. Verricchio has examined fossilized nests and embryos in order to understand how dinosaurs cared for their young. His research has revealed that many theropod dinosaurs built organized nests where eggs were arranged in circular patterns. The parent animals often positioned themselves directly above the eggs, with their forelimbs spread around the nest. This arrangement resembles the brooding behavior seen in many modern birds. Birds, of course, are the living descendants of certain theropod dinosaurs. Their nesting behavior provides valuable clues about how similar behaviors may have evolved in prehistoric species. The brooding fossils of Oviraptor provide some of the clearest evidence of this connection. In several cases, the parent dinosaur appears to have died while sitting on the nest, perhaps buried suddenly by a sandstorm or collapsing sediment. The result is a fossil snapshot of parental care preserved in stone. These discoveries transformed the scientific understanding of Oviraptor. The supposed egg thief was not a thief at all. Instead, it was one of the earliest known examples of dinosaurs carefully guarding their nests. Understanding why animals invest time and energy in caring for their offspring brings us to an important concept in evolutionary biology, known as parental investment theory. This theory was developed by the evolutionary biologist Robert Trivers in the 1970s. Parental investment theory examines how the effort devoted to raising offspring influences reproductive strategies and behavior. The basic idea is straightforward. Producing offspring requires resources such as time, energy, and protection. When parents invest heavily in caring for their young, the survival rate of those offspring increases. However, the parent must sacrifice opportunities to produce additional offspring during that time. Different species evolve different strategies depending on environmental conditions and survival pressures. Some animals produce large numbers of offspring with little parental care, hoping that a few will survive. Others produce fewer offspring, but invest significant effort in protecting and nurturing them. The brooding behavior observed in Oviraptor suggests that this dinosaur followed the second strategy. By sitting on its eggs and protecting them from predators or environmental dangers, the parent increased the chances that its young would successfully hatch. This form of care requires patience and energy. It also suggests that dinosaurs may have possessed more complex behaviors than earlier generations of scientists assumed. For a long time, dinosaurs were portrayed as slow-moving reptiles with limited intelligence and simple instincts. Discoveries like the brooding Oviraptor fossils reveal a different picture. At least some dinosaurs appear to have engaged in behaviors that resemble those of modern birds. They built nests, they arranged eggs carefully, and they guarded their developing offspring. These findings remind us that the fossil record does not only preserve bones and skeletons. Occasionally, it also preserves moments of behavior. A parent dinosaur crouched protectively over its eggs, frozen in time for tens of millions of years. The story of Oviraptor also illustrates an important lesson about science itself. Initial interpretations are sometimes shaped by incomplete evidence. As new discoveries emerge, those interpretations can change. The egg thief became a dedicated parent, and in doing so, Oviraptor helped reveal that the lives of dinosaurs were likely far more complex and familiar than we once imagined. In the quiet prehistoric landscapes of the late Cretaceous, long before humans ever walked the earth, a feathered dinosaur may have sat patiently on its nest, guarding a cluster of eggs beneath its wings, not stealing them, protecting them. In the forests of northeastern China, layers of ancient volcanic ash have preserved some of the most delicate fossils ever discovered. These deposits, located in Liaoning province, have become famous among paleontologists for revealing animals in extraordinary detail. Feathers, skin outlines, and even microscopic structures sometimes remain visible in the rock. Among the many discoveries from this region, one small dinosaur has attracted particular attention. Its name is Microraptor. Microraptor Guy lived during the early Cretaceous period, roughly 120 million years ago. Compared with many of the large dinosaurs often discussed in museums and documentaries, Microraptor was quite small. Its body length measured only around 1 meter from head to tail, and its weight may have been similar to that of a modern crow. Yet despite its modest size, this animal has played an important role in understanding how flight evolved. When paleontologists first examined the fossils of Microraptor, they noticed something unusual about the arrangement of feathers on its body. Like many small theropod dinosaurs, Microraptor possessed feathers along its arms that resembled the wings of birds. However, it also had large flight feathers attached to its hind legs. In other words, Microraptor appeared to have 4 wings, 2 wings formed by the feathered forelimbs, and another pair created by long feathers extending from the legs. This configuration immediately raised intriguing questions. Modern birds use their forelimbs as wings, while their legs remain separate structures used for walking or perching. No living bird possesses large aerodynamic feathers attached to its hind limbs. Yet Microraptor clearly displayed this unusual arrangement. To understand what this meant for the animal's ability to move through the air, scientists turned to aerodynamic modelling. One researcher who explored this question in detail is Sankar Chatterjee, a paleontologist known for studying the evolution of flight in prehistoric animals. Chatterjee and his colleagues constructed physical models of Microraptor and tested how different wing arrangements might perform during gliding. By examining how air flowed across the wings and measuring how the model descended through the air, they could estimate which positions produced stable flight. The results suggested that Microraptor may have been an effective glider. Instead of flying in the same way as modern birds, it likely climbed trees and launched itself into the air, before gliding down toward another branch or landing site. In these experiments, the hind limb feathers formed additional aerodynamic surfaces that helped stabilize the animal during descent. The four-wing configuration may have provided extra lift and control as the animal moved through the forest canopy. This kind of gliding behavior is not unusual in modern animals. Flying squirrels, for example, glide between trees using membranes of skin stretched between their limbs. Some lizards also glide by spreading flaps of skin supported by elongated ribs. In each case, the animal begins from a high perch and uses gravity to gain forward motion, while its wings or membranes slow its fall. Microraptor appears to have followed a similar strategy. The forest environment where it lived would have provided many tall trees and dense vegetation. Moving between branches by gliding could have allowed the dinosaur to travel efficiently, while avoiding predators on the ground. Understanding the broader significance of Microraptor requires placing it within the larger story of feathered dinosaur discoverers. During the late 20th century and early 21st century, numerous feathered dinosaur fossils were uncovered in Liaoning province. These fossils revealed that feathers were not limited to animals closely related to birds. Instead, feathers appeared in a wide range of small theropod dinosaurs. One scientist who played a major role in studying these fossils is Mark Norell of the American Museum of Natural History in New York. Norell and his colleagues helped analyze several important specimens that demonstrated the close evolutionary relationship between dinosaurs and birds. The evidence from these fossils is now overwhelming. Birds are not simply related to dinosaurs, they are dinosaurs. More specifically, birds represent a surviving branch of the theropod lineage. The same group that includes animals such as Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus also gave rise to the ancestors of modern birds. Feathers, once thought to belong exclusively to birds, evolved earlier within this group and served several purposes. In the earliest feathered dinosaurs, feathers may have provided insulation, helping animals regulate body temperature. They may also have functioned as display structures used for communication or mating. Only later did certain lineages begin using feathers for aerial movement. Microraptor represents one of the intermediate stages in this evolutionary process. It possessed well-developed feathers capable of interacting with the air, yet its anatomy suggests that it was not fully adapted for sustained powered flight. Instead, it occupied a stage where gliding likely played a significant role. Studying such intermediate forms helps scientists understand how complex abilities like flight evolve over time. Rather than appearing suddenly, flight likely developed gradually through a series of small changes. Early feathered dinosaurs may have used their feathers for balance or display. Later species may have used them to slow their descent when jumping from elevated surfaces. Over time, natural selection could refine these structures into increasingly efficient wings. Eventually, some dinosaurs developed the powerful flight muscles and skeletal modifications required for true flapping flight. Microraptor provides an important glimpse into one of those earlier stages. Its four-wing configuration suggests that evolution experimented with multiple aerodynamic solutions before settling on the wing design seen in modern birds. In evolutionary biology, this process is often described as exploration. Natural selection does not follow a predetermined plan. Instead, it produces variations, and those variations are tested against the challenges of survival and reproduction. Some designs prove effective and persist for millions of years. Others appear briefly and then disappear, leaving behind only fossil evidence of their existence. The four-wing design of Microraptor may represent one such evolutionary experiment. While effective for gliding, it may not have been as efficient as the two-wing configuration that eventually became dominant in birds. Over time, the hind limb feathers were reduced or lost as forelimb wings became more specialized. Yet the fossils of Microraptor remind us that the path toward flight was not a simple straight line. It was a branching process filled with variation and experimentation. In the ancient forests of Cretaceous China, small feathered dinosaurs moved quietly through the canopy. Some may have clambered along branches like modern birds. Others may have launched themselves into the air, spreading four-feathered wings as they glided between trees. These animals represent a moment in evolutionary history when the boundary between dinosaurs and birds was still unfolding. And in that moment, the skies of prehistoric forests may have been filled with creatures whose wings came not in pairs, but in fours. Among the many predators that roamed the ancient world, some stand out not because of their size alone, but because of how unusual their bodies appear when compared with other dinosaurs. One such predator is Carnotaurus. Carnotaurus sastri lived during the late Cretaceous period, roughly 70 million years ago, in what is now Argentina. The species was first described by the Argentine paleontologist José Bonaparte in the year 1985, after the discovery of an exceptionally well-preserved skeleton in Patagonia. Bonaparte had already helped reveal a remarkable diversity of South American dinosaurs, but Carnotaurus immediately attracted attention because its anatomy seemed both familiar and strangely exaggerated. At first glance, Carnotaurus was clearly a theropod dinosaur, the same broad group that includes famous predators such as Tyrannosaurus and Allosaurus. It walked on two powerful hind legs, possessed a long tail for balance, and carried a skull filled with sharp teeth designed for slicing flesh. Yet several features set it apart from other theropods. The most obvious difference was the pair of horns positioned directly above its eyes. These horns projected outward and slightly upward from the skull, giving the animal a distinctive silhouette. While horns are common among herbivorous dinosaurs such as Triceratops, they're extremely rare among large carnivorous species. Carnotaurus remains one of the only known theropods to possess such prominent horns. What purpose these horns served remains a subject of discussion among paleontologists. Some researchers have suggested that they may have functioned as display structures used during social interactions. Brightly coloured keratin coverings might have made the horns visually striking when seen by other members of the species. Another possibility is that the horns were used during physical contests between individuals. If two Carnotaurus adults engaged in pushing matches or ritualized combat, the horns could have helped distribute force across the skull. However, the horns were relatively small compared with those of many herbivorous dinosaurs, suggesting that their primary role may have been visual signaling rather than heavy combat. If the horns give Carnotaurus a somewhat dramatic appearance, another feature of its anatomy creates an entirely different kind of surprise. Its forelimbs were astonishingly small. Many theropod dinosaurs possess relatively short arms, but Carnotaurus took this reduction to an extreme. Its forelimbs were even smaller in proportion to its body than those of Tyrannosaurus rex. Each arm was short, slender, and ended in tiny fingers that appear to have had limited range of motion. Compared to the powerful hind legs and muscular tail, the forelimbs seem almost strangely out of place. Scientists have debated the function of these arms for many years. Some interpretations suggest they may have played only a minor role in the animal's daily life, perhaps assisting in balance or helping the animal rise from a resting position. Others suggest that they may have been involved in social display or mating behavior. What is clear is that Carnotaurus relied primarily on its head and jaws for hunting rather than on its arms. Another remarkable feature of the Carnotaurus fossil involves the preservation of its skin. Unlike many dinosaur fossils that preserve only bones, the Carnotaurus specimen included impressions of the skin covering large portions of the body. These impressions revealed an unusual pattern of scales arranged across the animal's surface. Instead of large overlapping scales like those of many reptiles, the skin of Carnotaurus appears to have been covered in small circular scales interspersed with larger bumps. These raised structures formed a subtle pattern across the body, somewhat similar to the texture seen in certain modern reptiles. The discovery of such skin impressions provides valuable information about how dinosaurs may have appeared in life. Fossils preserving skin are relatively rare, so each example offers an important opportunity to study details that would otherwise remain unknown. The body structure of Carnotaurus also provides clues about how it may have moved through its environment. Researchers studying theropod locomotion often examine the proportions of the legs, pelvis, and tail to estimate running ability. Long hind limbs combined with strong muscle attachments suggest that an animal may have been capable of rapid movement. Carnotaurus appears to have possessed exactly this type of anatomy. Biomechanical research by paleontologists such as Ariel Mendez has examined how abelosaurid dinosaurs, the group to which Carnotaurus belongs, may have moved. By analysing limb proportions and muscle attachment points, scientists can estimate how these predators balance speed and strength. The structure of Carnotaurus suggests that it may have been a relatively fast runner for its size. Its legs were long and powerful, and the body appears to have been streamlined compared with some other large theropods. Instead of relying on ambush alone, Carnotaurus may have been capable of chasing prey across open terrain. Understanding why such a predator evolved in South America requires considering the broader ecological context. During the late Cretaceous period, different continents hosted distinct communities of dinosaurs. The breakup of the supercontinent Gondwana had isolated South America from other landmasses for long periods of time. As a result, dinosaur lineages on that continent evolved along somewhat different paths than those in North America or Asia. Large tyrannosaur predators dominated ecosystems in the northern continents. In contrast, South America was home to several groups of theropods known as abelisaurids. Abelisaurids typically possessed short, deep skulls and reduced forelimbs. Some species developed crests or horns on their heads. Carnotaurus represents one of the most specialized members of this group. Its horns, extremely reduced arms, and streamlined body reflect the unique evolutionary pressures present in South American ecosystems. Regional isolation often leads to distinctive evolutionary outcomes. When populations remain separated for millions of years, natural selection operates independently in each region, producing animals that may differ dramatically from their relatives elsewhere. Carnotaurus illustrates how predator evolution can diverge under these conditions. While tyrannosaurs evolved massive skulls and powerful bite forces in North America and Asia, abelisaurids like Carnotaurus developed their own distinctive adaptations. The result was a predator with horns above its eyes, skin patterned with unusual scales, and arms so small that they appear almost decorative. Yet despite these peculiarities, Carnotaurus was clearly a successful hunter within its environment. In the prehistoric plains of ancient South America, a predator built for speed and equipped with a powerful skull may have been perfectly suited for the available prey. Its strange anatomy reminds us that evolution does not produce a single standard design for predators. Instead, different lineages explore different solutions to the same challenges of survival, and sometimes those solutions produce creatures whose appearance feels both familiar and surprisingly unconventional at the same time. When people picture dinosaurs, the animals that usually come to mind are enormous, towering long-necked giants browsing treetops, massive predators with jaws large enough to swallow a human whole, armored herbivores covered in plates and spikes. Yet the prehistoric world was not populated only by giants. For every enormous sauropod or terrifying carnivore, there were also countless small dinosaurs living quieter, more subtle lives among the vegetation, rocks, and fallen branches of ancient landscapes. These smaller species rarely attract the same attention as their gigantic relatives, but they were likely just as important to the ecosystems of their time. One such dinosaur carries the unusual name Pegomastax. Pegomastax africanus was described by the American paleontologist Paul Sereno, who has led numerous fossil expeditions across Africa. The fossils of this tiny dinosaur were originally discovered in southern Africa in rocks dating to the early Jurassic period, more than 190 million years ago. Compared with many dinosaurs, Pegomastax was extremely small. Its entire body may have measured only around 60 centimeters in length, roughly the size of a modern house cat. It walked on two slender legs, with a compact body and a relatively large head. At first glance, Pegomastax might appear somewhat ordinary for a small herbivorous dinosaur. But a closer look at the skull reveals something unexpected. The front of the mouth formed a sharp beak, similar to the beak seen in many plant-eating dinosaurs. Beaks are useful tools for cropping vegetation, allowing animals to slice through leaves, stems, and other plant material efficiently. Behind this beak, however, sat a pair of long, fang-like teeth, projecting downward from the upper jaw. Fangs are not normally associated with herbivores. When we see sharp canine teeth in modern animals, we usually think of predators such as lions or wolves. Yet Pegomastax appears to have been primarily plant-eating, with most of its teeth shaped for chewing vegetation. So why would a small herbivorous dinosaur evolve prominent fangs? One possibility is defense. Small animals are vulnerable to predators, and possessing even a modest weapon can provide an advantage. The fang-like teeth of Pegomastax may have allowed it to bite if threatened, delivering a painful nip that discouraged attackers. Another possibility is display. Across the animal kingdom, certain teeth and horns evolved not for feeding, but for communication between members of the same species. Bright colours, exaggerated structures, or unusual shapes can signal maturity, strength, or readiness to compete for mates. The fangs of Pegomastax might have served as visual signals during social interactions. understanding the significance of such small dinosaurs also requires considering a broader evolutionary principle known as miniaturization. Miniaturization occurs when a lineage evolves towards smaller body sizes over time. This process can open up entirely new ecological opportunities. Smaller animals require less food, reproduce more quickly, and can exploit environments inaccessible to larger species. Evolutionary biologist Michael Lee of Flinders University has studied patterns of body size change in ancient reptiles and dinosaurs. His research shows that shifts towards smaller size often coincide with important evolutionary innovations. For example, early members of the dinosaur lineage may have experienced phases of miniaturization that allowed them to move more quickly, explore new habitats, and develop new anatomical features. Small body size can also accelerate evolutionary change because shorter lifespans and faster reproduction allow new traits to spread through populations more rapidly. Pegomastax represents one of many small dinosaurs that likely inhabited ecological niches quite different from those occupied by their larger relatives. In modern ecosystems, small mammals such as rodents, rabbits, and shrews fill a wide variety of roles. They forage for seeds, leaves, and insects. They burrow underground, climb trees, and move quickly through dense vegetation. It is possible that small dinosaurs performed similar roles in prehistoric ecosystems. Research by paleontologists such as Richard Butler of the University of Birmingham has explored the early evolution of ornithischian dinosaurs, the broader group to which Pegomastax belongs. Ornithischians include many well-known plant-eating dinosaurs such as Stegosaurus and Triceratops. But early members of this group were often small and lightly built. These animals may have lived in environments where speed, agility, and caution were essential for survival. Their diets could have included a mixture of soft plants, seeds, and perhaps even small insects. Because their bones were delicate, small dinosaurs are less likely to be preserved in the fossil record. Large skeletons tend to survive fossilization more easily, while tiny bones can be scattered or destroyed before they are buried. As a result, paleontologists suspect that the diversity of small dinosaurs may be underrepresented in the fossils we have discovered so far. In other words, the prehistoric world may have been filled with far more small dinosaurs than the fossil record currently reveals. Pegomastax offers a glimpse into this hidden side of dinosaur evolution. Its unusual combination of features, including a beak for cropping plants and fangs for defense or display, suggests a creature adapted to a complex and competitive environment. Instead of towering above the landscape, Pegomastax likely lived close to the ground, moving quickly through undergrowth while keeping watch for predators. In such a setting, agility and alertness would have been more important than sheer size. Its small body allowed it to navigate spaces between larger animals, feeding on vegetation that might be ignored by bigger herbivores. The presence of fang-like teeth hints at a life where occasional confrontation or display played a role in survival. Perhaps two individuals faced each other briefly, flashing their teeth in warning before one retreated. Perhaps the fangs served as signals that helped identify members of the same species within a crowded ecosystem. Whatever their exact function, these features remind us that dinosaur evolution was not only about producing giants, it also involved countless smaller animals exploring the quieter corners of prehistoric habitats. Animals that scurried beneath the feet of larger dinosaurs. Animals that darted between shrubs and low branches. Animals whose fossils are rare, but whose lives were just as rich and complex as those of the giants that overshadow them. Pegomastax stands as a reminder that sometimes the most intriguing evolutionary stories belong not to the largest creatures, but to the smallest ones quietly living in their shadow. For much of the 20th century, dinosaurs were almost always imagined in the same way. Large reptiles with scaly skin, heavy tails, and rough armoured bodies walking slowly through prehistoric landscapes. Illustrations in textbooks and museums showed dinosaurs with surfaces that resembled the hides of crocodiles or lizards. These reconstructions were not unreasonable. The fossil record preserved bones very well, but soft tissues such as skin, feathers, and internal organs rarely survived the long journey from living animal to fossilized remains. Without clear evidence of those features, scientists filled the gaps with comparisons to modern reptiles. Then, during the 1990s, a series of discoveries in northeastern China changed the picture almost overnight. In the fossil-rich rocks of Liaoning province, paleontologists began uncovering dinosaur skeletons surrounded by delicate impressions of feather-like structures. These fossils came from sedimentary deposits formed roughly 120 million years ago during the early Cretaceous period. The preservation in this region was extraordinary. Fine volcanic ash had settled gently over animals that died near ancient lakes, burying them quickly and protecting their bodies from scavengers and decay. Under these unusual conditions, even fragile tissues such as feathers could leave detailed impressions in the surrounding rock. The first widely recognized feathered dinosaur from this region was a species called Sinosauropteryx. When paleontologists examined the fossil, they noticed a halo of filament-like structures surrounding the skeleton. These filaments resembled primitive feathers rather than reptilian scales. Soon afterward, additional discoveries followed. Dinosaurs such as Caudipteryx, Protarchaeopteryx, and Microraptor revealed feathers arranged in complex patterns across their bodies. Some species possessed fully developed flight feathers on their arms and tails. These discoveries demonstrated something that had long been suspected, but never clearly proven. Feathers were not exclusive to birds. Instead, they evolved earlier among small theropod dinosaurs, the same broad group that eventually produced the ancestors of modern birds. As more fossils emerged, the concept of dinosaurs as purely scaly reptiles began to fade. Instead, paleontologists increasingly recognized that many dinosaurs were feathered, colorful, and visually striking animals. Yet a new question soon emerged. If these dinosaurs possessed feathers, what colors were they? For many years, answering that question seemed impossible. Pigments rarely survive fossilization, and the colors of ancient animals appeared lost forever. Then, advances in microscopy opened an unexpected window into the past. Scientists studying modern feathers discovered that color in many birds is produced by microscopic structures called melanosomes. Melanosomes are tiny organelles within cells that store pigments known as melanin. Different shapes of melanosomes correspond to different colors. Elongated melanosomes tend to produce black or grey pigmentation, while rounder forms are associated with reddish or brown tones. If similar structures could somehow survive fossilization, they might reveal the colors of prehistoric animals. This possibility was explored by researchers including Jacob Winther, a paleobiologist known for pioneering studies in fossil color reconstruction. Winther and his colleagues examined feather impressions from fossils under powerful electron microscopes. To their surprise, they discovered microscopic structures preserved within the rock that closely resemble melanosomes found in modern feathers. By comparing the shapes and arrangements of these fossil melanosomes with those in living birds, scientists could estimate the likely color patterns of the ancient animals. One particularly striking example involved the small feathered dinosaur Sinosauropteryx. Analysis revealed that its tail likely possessed alternating bands of color, creating a striped pattern similar to that seen in certain modern mammals and birds. Another species, Anchiornis, displayed complex patterns of black, white, and reddish feathers across its body. These findings suggested that dinosaurs were not only feathered, but also visually vibrant. Some may have possessed bold color patterns used for display or camouflage within their environments. Research into fossil color has also been advanced by scientists such as Ryan Carney, who has studied the pigmentation of early birds and feathered dinosaurs in remarkable detail. Carney and his colleagues have reconstructed the colors of species such as Archaeopteryx, the famous early bird from the Jurassic period. Their analyses revealed that Archaeopteryx likely possessed dark-colored flight feathers, which may have helped strengthen the feathers during flight. The ability to reconstruct such details represents a remarkable achievement. For the first time, scientists can move beyond simple skeletal reconstructions and begin imagining how these animals actually appeared in life. Understanding how delicate structures like feathers survive fossilization requires examining the chemical processes involved in preservation. This work has been advanced by researchers such as Derek Briggs of Yale University, who studies how soft tissues become fossilized under unusual conditions. Briggs and his colleagues have shown that certain environments can stabilize organic structures before they completely decay. Minerals may gradually replace soft tissues, preserving fine details that would normally disappear. Under the right circumstances, even microscopic cellular structures can remain visible for millions of years. The fossil deposits of Liaoning represent one of these rare preservation environments. Because the sediments settled gently and rapidly, they protected delicate features such as feathers, skin outlines, and even traces of internal anatomy. These discoveries have transformed the way scientists reconstruct dinosaurs. Where earlier reconstructions often depicted dinosaurs as grey or brown reptiles, Modern illustrations increasingly show animals with feathers, patterns, and sometimes even bright colors. Artists working with paleontologists now consider feather arrangements, pigmentation patterns, and display structures when creating scientific reconstructions. The result is a much richer and more complex picture of prehistoric life. Instead of dull reptilian creatures trudging through swamps, many dinosaurs may have resembled oversized birds with intricate plumage and striking visual displays. Feathers themselves likely served multiple functions. In the earliest dinosaurs that possessed them, feathers may have helped to regulate body temperature by trapping air close to the skin. This would have been especially useful for small animals with high metabolic rates. Feathers may also have played roles in courtship displays, territorial signaling, and camouflage. Bright patterns could help attract mates, while muted colors might allow animals to blend into forest environments. Only later did some feathered dinosaurs begin using these structures for aerial movement. In this way, feathers represent a classic example of evolutionary innovation. A structure that began with one purpose gradually took on additional roles over time: insulation, display, and eventually flight. The feather discoveries of Liaoning have therefore reshaped our understanding of dinosaurs at a very fundamental level. They demonstrate that the boundary between dinosaurs and birds is far more blurred than once imagined. Modern birds are not simply distant relatives of dinosaurs, they are living members of the dinosaur lineage. When we watch a bird flying across the sky today, we are observing the descendants of animals that once walked alongside giants, such as Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops. The feather revolution in dinosaur science has revealed that prehistoric ecosystems were filled with creatures far more colourful, dynamic, and visually striking than earlier generations of scientists ever suspected. And as new fossils continue to emerge from ancient rocks around the world, the picture of dinosaurs in life grows ever more vivid and fascinating. Even after more than a century of fossil discoveries, the search for new dinosaurs is far from finished. In fact, many paleontologists believe that we are still only beginning to understand the true diversity of the dinosaur world. Each year, new fossils emerge from rocks that have remained undisturbed for tens or even hundreds of millions of years, offering fresh clues about animals that once walked across ancient landscapes. Across several regions of the world, field teams continue to explore formations that have already produced some of the most important discoveries in paleontology. One of these regions is the Gobi Desert of Mongolia. The dry winds and exposed rock layers of the Gobi have made it one of the richest fossil hunting grounds on Earth. Expeditions in this region have uncovered famous species such as Velociraptor, Protoceratops, and the long mysterious Deinocheirus. Modern research programs continue this work today. Paleontologist Philip Currie from the University of Alberta has participated in numerous expeditions across Mongolia and northern China, collaborating with international teams to uncover new fossils and study dinosaur behavior. Currie's work has helped illuminate how certain theropod dinosaurs may have hunted in groups, and how ecosystems in this part of the world evolved during the late Cretaceous period. Far to the south, the vast landscapes of Argentina have also become a centre of dinosaur discovery. Patagonia in particular contains rock formations that preserve some of the largest dinosaurs ever known. Fieldwork in this region has revealed enormous sauropods, unusual predators, and a wide variety of plant-eating species that once thrived in the ancient environments of Gondwana. Argentine paleontologists continue to uncover new fossils from these deposits, often working in collaboration with international researchers. Each new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle of how dinosaurs evolved across the southern continents. China has also emerged as one of the most important locations for dinosaur research in recent decades. The fossil deposits of Liaoning province have already revealed feathered dinosaurs that transformed scientific understanding of dinosaur biology. Research teams led by paleontologists such as Xu Xing have described dozens of new species from these formations. Xu Xing is known for his extensive work on theropod dinosaurs and early birds, and his discoveries have helped establish China as a major centre for paleontological research. Many of the fossils from Liaoning preserve remarkable details of feathers, skin, and soft tissues. These discoveries continue to reshape how scientists imagine prehistoric animals. North America remains another important region for ongoing fossil work. The Badlands of Montana, Alberta, and the Dakotas contain rock layers rich in dinosaur fossils from the late Cretaceous period. Field teams carefully search these areas for fragments of bone weathering out of the sediment, often spending weeks excavating delicate specimens from the surrounding rock. Each discovery requires patience and careful preparation. Large fossils may be encased in protective plaster jackets before being transported to laboratories, where technicians slowly remove the surrounding rock using specialized tools. But the future of dinosaur discovery does not depend only on finding new fossils. It also depends on new technologies that allow scientists to study fossils in ways that were once impossible. One powerful tool is synchrotron imaging. A synchrotron is a type of particle accelerator that produces extremely bright beams of X-rays. These beams can pass through fossils and reveal internal structures at incredibly fine resolution. Unlike ordinary X-ray machines, synchrotron imaging can detect microscopic features within fossilized bones and soft tissues. Scientists can examine growth patterns, cellular structures, and chemical compositions hidden deep inside the specimen. Such techniques have revealed details about dinosaur metabolism, bone growth, and even the development of embryos inside fossilized eggs. Another emerging area of research involves artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence systems can analyze large data sets and recognize patterns that might be difficult for humans to detect. In paleontology, these tools are beginning to assist researchers in identifying subtle features within fossils or predicting where undiscovered fossils might be located. Machine learning algorithms can examine thousands of fossil measurements and compare them across species, helping scientists identify evolutionary relationships or detect hidden patterns in anatomical data. While these technologies do not replace traditional fieldwork, they provide powerful new tools for interpreting the fossils that researchers uncover. Even with these advances, one of the most intriguing questions in paleontology remains unanswered. How many dinosaur species have yet to be discovered? Estimating this number is surprisingly difficult. Fossil preservation is an uneven process. Some environments preserve bones very well, while others destroy them quickly. Many ancient ecosystems may have contained species that left little or no trace in the fossil record. Researchers have attempted to estimate hidden diversity using statistical methods. One scientist who has explored this question is Alistair Evans, an evolutionary biologist who studies patterns of biodiversity across deep time. Evans and his colleagues analyze fossil discovery rates and compare them with modern patterns of species diversity. Their work suggests that the number of dinosaur species currently known may represent only a fraction of those that once existed. In other words, the fossil record is incomplete. There may be many species that lived and vanished without leaving clear fossil evidence. Others may still lie buried in rocks that have not yet been explored. Some paleontologists estimate that hundreds of dinosaur species remain undiscovered. Each new fossil discovery has the potential to reveal another unusual anatomy, another unexpected lifestyle, or another evolutionary experiment that broadens our understanding of prehistoric life. The strange dinosaurs already known to science were once completely unknown. Therizinosaurus, with its enormous claws, was initially misidentified. Spinosaurus surprised researchers with its aquatic adaptations. Feathered dinosaurs reshaped the connection between dinosaurs and birds. Future discoveries may reveal creatures even more unusual. Perhaps a dinosaur with a feeding strategy unlike any yet observed. Perhaps a species with entirely new types of display structures or body shapes. Or perhaps fossils that reveal unexpected behaviors preserved in ancient sediments. The rocks of Earth still contain vast archives of biological history waiting to be uncovered. Across deserts, mountains, forests, and cliffs, paleontologists continue searching carefully for fragments of bone that might reveal the next chapter in the story of dinosaurs. Each expedition carries the possibility of discovery, and with each discovery our understanding of the prehistoric world becomes richer and more complex. Somewhere beneath layers of ancient rock, there may still be dinosaurs stranger than any we have yet imagined, waiting patiently for the moment when a curious human hand brushes away the dust and reveals them once again.